In this video I'll show you how to add or subtract functions graphically, but it's not something that we would normally do manually. We would use a graphics calculator to do this, and so it's not examinable in the TPP 115 course. We have two functions, f of x and g of x, and we can add the y coordinates of each of those to get the sum function. Let's start with f of x equals 1 over x minus 2. At x equals 2 we have a point of discontinuity because our denominator would be 0. At x equals 3 we'll have 1 over 1, so that's 1, so there's a point we can plot. At x equals 4 we'll have 1 over 2, it's a half, so there's another point. And we'll get a bit closer to this 2 line here by putting x equals 2.5 in there, giving us a half in the denominator. 1 over a half is 2, so we will get the point 2.5, 2. We'll flip over to the other side of that discontinuity and we'll try x equals 1 into our equation. That'll give us minus 1 in the denominator, so our y value will be minus 1. Putting x equals 0 into f of x, we will get 1 over negative 2, so that's negative a half. And again, if we try something a little bit closer to 2, we'll try 1.5 minus 2 will give us negative a half. So 1 over negative a half is negative 2, so that gives us that point there. We can now join those points up in smooth curves like that, and that gives us our f of x. We now move over to g of x. We do the same sort of thing. We'll first observe that we have a positive square root here. We must have 0 or above inside the square root, so we can't have x less than negative 1. At x equals negative 1, we'll get 0 there, so that gives us the point negative 1, 0. We'll move on to x equals 0. We'll get the square root of 1 is 1. And now I'll jump over to x equals 3, and so 3 and 1 is 4 there, so square root of 4 is 2, so I can plot the point 3, 2. And once again I can join those up in a smooth curve to get that graph. Now to find the sum function then, what I need to do is to add the y coordinates. Now we can't add y coordinates when x is less than negative 1 because our g of x function is not defined there. Starting at x equals negative 1 we have 0 and negative 0.3 which sum to negative 0.3. Moving over to x equals 0 we've got this value here which is negative a half plus the 1 will give us our value of y for the sum function of a half. At x equals 1 we have y is negative 1 plus 1.4 which equals 0.4, and we'll observe that as we get closer to 2 we're going to be just that little bit above this bottom graph over here. And if we continue on to say x equals a half here, we've got negative 2 there and we're adding about 1.6 there, and so we'll get a value of y that is as shown. We can now join those up in a smooth curve. Notice that we're approaching the blue curve at the bottom there, but we'll be just that little bit above it. Going over to the other side, we'll do the same sort of thing, and we can add some points again. So at x equals 2.5, we will have y as 2 there, and a value just below 2, so adding those two together, we'll get that point there. At x equals 3, we've got 1 and 2 will make 3, so we can plot that point. At x equals 4, we've got a half there added on to that point there, so we'll be a half above that one, and so on and so forth. We can keep adding more and more points. Now you'll notice that as x gets bigger and bigger and bigger, our hyperbola here gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so we'll be sitting above this g of x curve, but we'll be getting closer and closer to it. So the combined graph there will look like that.